Hey guys, tonight we glide quietly through mist and moonlight. No city sounds, no traffic, no notifications. Just the creak of a shallow canoe as it drifts gently between green islands that somehow float. Yes, float. These aren't your average raised beds or backyard veggie patches. You're sailing through the Chinampas, the legendary floating gardens of the Aztec world. You probably wouldn't survive the mosquitoes, or the fact that these gardens weren't actually floating, but we'll get to that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where the sleepy historians of the world are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch low in the canoe, fingertips brushing the lake's glassy surface. It's midnight over Lake Xochimilco. The water is dark but still. With a slow current you can't feel but just sense, like the garden's own breath. Your guide doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He pushes the boat forward with a long pole, gently tapping submerged roots as you glide past banks thick with maize, squash, marigolds, and amaranth. The air smells like wet earth, crushed herbs, and something faintly sweet cacao blossoms. Maybe these aren't just gardens. They're systems, floating just above the swampy lake, anchored by patience and genius. Historians still argue whether the term floating is fair technically. They're artificial islands made by layering lake mud and reeds atop wooden frames sunk into shallow waters. But floating sounds more romantic. And let's be honest, it's midnight. We'll allow it. The canoe bumps softly into the edge of one garden, and you step out. Your feet sink slightly into the spongy earth. It's alive, breathing. You can feel the reeds underfoot, the squish of mud mixed with compost, and the cooling pull of lake water just beneath the topsoil. The Aztecs didn't just grow food here. They grew rhythm. Rows of maize point not toward a market, but toward stillness. Tomatoes hang like tiny red lanterns between stalks of sunflowers and chili plants. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks once, twice, then goes silent. You reach down and brush your fingers across a patch of moss hugging the base of a beanpole. It's damp, smells faintly of rain, and maybe something older, as if it remembers when this patch of garden was laid down. Maybe 50 years ago, maybe 200, because these weren't single-season plots. These chinampas were permanent, layered and relayered over time. Gardeners would dredge muck from the lake bottom and pile it over dried reeds and corn stalks to create new layers like lasagna for the earth. It held moisture beautifully. Plants thrived, and so did tranquility. You pause under a willow arching low over the garden's edge. Its thin leaves whisper against your shoulder. The stars above are mirrored perfectly in the lake. You can't tell where the garden ends and the sky begins, and maybe that's the point. This wasn't gardening for output. It was existence in alignment with the moon, with the rain, with the slow inevitability of root systems and morning birds. There's no grand monument here, no pyramids or palaces, but the gardens were no less sacred. In fact, they may have been more so, as they were touched daily, tended gently, patiently. The priest who conducted sacrifices might have gone home and watered his squash. The warrior who returned from battle might have paused here to bury his doubts in the mud. Here's a strange fringe detail for you. Some Aztec gardeners would hum softly to their plants, not full songs, just little sounds. Notes held long enough to sync breath and leaf. No one knows if it helped the plants grow, but it definitely helped them grow still. You sit on a low bench woven from reeds and wood. You press your palm to the earth. It's warm. The stars flicker above, and somewhere in the distance, the faint call of a night heron rises, circles, and fades. This garden doesn't want anything from you, except maybe stillness. And now, the breeze picks up just a little. It rustles the leaves, gently brushes your cheek. A blanket of calm settles across your shoulders. The Chinampa sleeps, and you, my friend, are nearly there too. The bench beneath you creaks slightly as you shift your weight, not from discomfort, but from curiosity. The night is still thick with silence, broken only by a soft splash in the distance, perhaps a fish sleeping, or a drifting piece of lake reed bumping gently into a pole. The Chinampa holds steady beneath you, as if it too is waiting for you to notice its secrets. Because here's the thing, you're not standing on a random plot of land. You're standing on an engineered miracle. These floating gardens weren't accidents of nature. They were the result of patient, generational design, equal parts mud, reed, and ingenuity. It all begins with the foundation. Imagine a frame made of stakes driven into the lake bed in long rectangles. These weren't tiny flower beds, one by the way. Some were up to 300 feet long and 30 feet wide. That's a full-on floating farm, bobbing quietly in ancient swamp water. Once the frames were in place, they'd layer mud from the lake bottom, then decaying vegetation, then more mud, like a layer cake of productivity. They didn't just dump materials randomly. No, the Aztecs learned how to balance drainage with water retention, how to let the roots breathe while also drinking. You crouch now and scoop a little soil into your hand. It's shockingly light and loamy. This is not compacted dirt, it's alive. Wriggling with microscopic movement, it smells of compost, minerals, something halfway between a greenhouse and a rainstorm. Historians still argue whether this technology was entirely Aztec or inherited from earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Xochimilca. But there's no doubt the Aztecs took it further than anyone before. The Chinampa system fed a city of over 200,000 people, and it did it sustainably, season after season. But here's the real kicker: while modern agriculture fights erosion and drought and overworked soil, these ancient lake gardens didn't erode, they renewed themselves. Each dredging of lake muck didn't strip the land, it fed it. You stand now, brushing your palms together. The dirt falls away in delicate clumps. The breeze has shifted, and the scent of water hyacinth wafts by, cool, a little sweet, a little murky. A figure approaches, moving along a narrow strip of garden between plots. He carries a bundle of sticks, maybe to reinforce the bed's edges. He's not rushing. No one does out here. His feet move like water over rock soft. Repetitive, practiced. He pauses when he sees you, nods politely, then returns to his work. Not out of disinterest, but because this space isn't about interruption, it's about integration. You glance toward the far edge of the garden and notice something odd, what looks like small trees growing straight up from the water's edge. These are ahuejote trees, a species of willow the Aztecs planted around the garden borders. Their roots helped anchor the soil, preventing it from drifting away. But they also cast shade, provided windbreaks, and some said carried the dreams of the farmers who planted them. That's not in most textbooks, by the way. But there are old Nahuatl poems that mention willows whispering the names of those who tend them. Take that as you will. And it's not just the plants doing the heavy lifting. The canals between the gardens were narrow on purpose, just wide enough for a flat-bottomed canoe. This minimized current, let roots hang safely, and gave gardeners easy access to their crops by paddle. You picture it now, a young farmer poling gently down a canal at dawn. Reed hat shading his eyes, a few birds drifting low above the water. He stops, plucks a few marigolds, harvests a squash. All before breakfast, you reach down and run your fingers over the furrowed leaves of a squash plant near your feet. Its blossoms are folded tight, sleeping just like everything else. But soon, they'll open with the morning sun, and the air will buzz with bees small, native ones without stingers, For now, though, everything is at rest. And maybe this is the secret? Not the engineering, not the productivity, but the rhythm. These gardens weren't built to rush. They were built to hold, to float, to carry. You lie back on the woven reed bench again, arms behind your head, overhead. The stars have shifted slightly. You can just make out Orion's belt and the faint smear of the Milky Way. The wind rustles the willows. And beneath you, the earth floats but does not drift. You sit up slowly, lulled by the rhythm of the breeze and the occasional creak of wood beneath you. But as you look around the Chinampa, something becomes clear. This place isn't quiet because nothing is happening. It's quiet because everything is happening just beneath the surface. You step lightly across a patch of soil, careful not to disturb the low-growing herbs scattered between the rows of maize and squash. The scent rises to greet you, bright, earthy, and unexpectedly floral. A kind of natural incense swirls up from the soil itself. This is more than just a garden. It's a habitat. And the first thing you notice, once your eyes adjust to the dim blue of pre-dawn, is that it moves. A frog leaps between the rows, landing in a muddy divot with a soft plop. Fireflies blink in the reeds, slow and steady, like tiny garden lanterns. A snail makes an impressive journey across a broad pumpkin leaf. Tiny birds rustle high in the willows overhead, not yet chirping, but stretching feathers and blinking into the light. The Aztecs didn't garden alone. They coexisted with pollinators, amphibians, insects, lizards, and fish. And none of them were considered pests in the way we might think today. Frogs were companions. Birds were messengers. Even the spiders had a role, spinning webs that glistened with dew. Catching pests without chemicals or concern, historians still argue about how intentional this biodiversity was. Some say it was a happy accident of the wetlands. Others believe the Aztecs actively designed their plots to attract and protect these species. Whatever the truth, it's hard to deny the garden hums with a life that feels deliberate. And then, you spot something curious, a clay pot half buried near the edge of the canal. Not for decoration. This is fertilizer storage. The Aztecs used a natural form of compost made from lake silt, crushed plants, fish bones, and yes, even human waste. All recycled, all sacred, all part of the loop. Don't wrinkle your nose just yet. Remember the crocodile dung sunscreen? Exactly. In Aztec cosmology, waste wasn't gross, it was potential. Something broken down only to become something else. Something essential. Even the gods of agriculture had underworld ties. To plant was to bury. To grow was to decay beautifully. You kneel by the canal and peer into the water. There's movement, a school of tiny fish darting between submerged roots. Their scales flash like silver in the dark. These weren't just decoration either. Some canals were stocked with edible fish. Others just provided balance, eating mosquito larvae. Fertilizing from below, rippling the surface with small, soothing waves. You dip your fingers in and let the coolness soak your skin. There's a strange peace in this balance. A peace that doesn't demand perfection, just cooperation. You wander a bit more, ducking under a vine-covered trellis where squash blossoms bloom. A hummingbird darts past your ear fast, but not frantic. It hovers above a flower, dips, then vanishes into the night like a spark flying home to its candle. Some Aztecs believed hummingbirds carried messages from the dead, or from dreams. Others believed they were pieces of the sun, split into feathers and sent fluttering into the world. Whatever they believed, they certainly built for them, planting nectar-rich flowers, crafting tiny ledges, and respecting the bird's space. You take a breath, long and slow, and realize you've been walking for a while now, and not once have you heard a harsh sound. No shouting, no digging, no thudding boots, just the soft chorus of life, moving in slow motion around you. This wasn't just gardening, it was orchestration. 1,000 moving parts held together by intuition, experience, and a kind of reverence that doesn't shout its name. You step back towards your bench. A spider web has appeared overnight, strung from one willow branch to another. The spider waits, patient, unmoving. Part of the design, not alarming, not out of place. Just there, doing its quiet work, like everything else. And as you lie back once more, eyes half-lidded, you realize this is what a garden looks like when it's not just about harvests, but about harmony. Dawn spills across the lake like warm honey, slow and golden. Light creeps through the trees, dancing across dew-slick leaves and flickering on the calm water. You blink a few times, not because you're fully awake, but because the shift in light is so gentle you almost mistake it for a dream. And you're not the only one waking up. At the edge of the Chinampa, a figure appears tall, robed in simple woven cloth, a reed hat casting a long shadow. He walks barefoot, holding a wooden ladle in one hand and a woven basket in the other. He doesn't rush. He doesn't speak. He just walks, step by step, along the soft garden path as if it's part of a ritual. Because it is. This is no ordinary farmer. He's a Tlamatini, a sage, a priest, a gardener of both the land and the spirit. In the Aztec world, roles were rarely singular. A person could plant maize, teach philosophy, and sing hymns to the rain gods all before breakfast. This particular Tlamatini begins his morning by dipping his ladle into a ceramic bowl tucked into the reeds. He lifts it high, lets the water pour out slowly over the base of a small chili plant. Not for irrigation, there's dew and lake moisture for that. No, this is ceremonial. A quiet offering. A greeting. Historians still argue how widespread such rituals were. Some say only high priests participated in spiritual gardening. Others believe every grower added something sacred to their work songs, prayers, rhythms passed down through generations. You follow him quietly as he continues. With each plant he visits, he hums. Not a melody exactly, just a sequence of rising and falling notes. Somewhere between a lullaby and a mantra, the plants don't answer. Of course, but you get the feeling they're listening. He pauses beside a row of amaranth, its burgundy flowers tall and feathery in the morning sun. Reaches down, presses his palm to the soil, whispers something you can't quite catch, and then he smiles. You don't know why, but you do too, because watching him work is like watching a painter, or a dancer, or someone who's never been in a hurry in his life. You reach down and touch a chili plant yourself. Its leaves are waxy, the stems a rich, vibrant green. The peppers still tiny buds. Really? But they're alive. And when you breathe in, there's a sharpness in the air, a little kick of spice. Even before tasting, the Tlamatini continues his walk, lifting blossoms, checking stems, notating everything with his senses alone. No notebook, no checklist, just intuition and long-earned memory. Nearby, a small altar made of smooth stones marks a corner of the garden. Upon it, a dried gourd, a few cacao beans, and what looks like a bundle of feathers tied with string. Offerings, no doubt. To Tlaloc, perhaps the rain god, or Chicomacoatl, the goddess of sustenance. Deities who didn't dwell in temples, but in the roots of maize and the spaces between vines. And here's a curious little detail. Some Aztec priests believed that chili peppers could drive away bad dreams when burned gently at sunrise. Not exactly incense, but a smoky, eye-watering wake-up call for the soul. You imagine it now sleeping beside a garden, the scent of chili smoke drifting in, carrying nightmares out on a breeze. It wouldn't be the worst way to wake up. The sun climbs higher. Mist lifts from the canals like a curtain. revealing other gardens nearby. Other figures rising, canoes pushing off, rippling the water with long, slow strokes. Birds begin to call, softly herons, warblers, even the odd screech from a distant egret. But nothing jars. Everything flows. You watch as the Tlamatini kneels beside a patch of beans and begins gently turning the soil with his fingers. No tools, no urgency, just soft, circular motions. He doesn't dig deep, just enough to breathe. And that, perhaps, is the lesson here. Gardening not as labor, not as control, but as communion. A moment of waking not with noise, but with presence. You sit down again on the edge of the path, brushing a few tiny pebbles away. The soil warms beneath you. The wind carries a faint scent of roasted maize from a garden a few plots away. The lake sparkles like a dream starting to fade. But you're still here, and the garden is just beginning. The sun is now fully awake, but somehow it's still gentle. Its light filters through the willows and bounces softly off the water. You stand, brushing your hands together, and begin to follow a narrow, winding path lined with cornstalks. As you walk, the air changes. The scent of morning dew fades, replaced by something richer, spicier, and almost delicious. You follow your nose straight into a row of chili plants short, but loaded with bright red pods that gleam like little warning bells in the sun, here in the Aztec garden. Food wasn't just fuel, it was medicine, ritual, and sometimes, surprisingly, relaxation. You crouch beside a plot of cacao trees, yes, the very source of chocolate. These small, leafy trees bear pods as big as your forearm, mottled in hues of saffron and russet. The Aztecs didn't eat chocolate the way we do. Of course, it wasn't sweet. It wasn't creamy. It was a bitter drink, often mixed with chili or cornmeal, and sometimes whipped into foam. But here's the surprising bit: cacao was also considered soothing, used in ceremonies. It was thought to calm the nerves and sharpen the mind. Some drank it before rituals, others before sleep. Historians still argue whether it actually aided rest or just made people feel ritually prepared to dream. Either way, it was a sacred part of Aztec garden life. You walk further and find a cluster of calming herbs: epazote, hoya santa, and wild passion flower. Tiny plots of herbs nestled between towering maize and prickly nopal cactus. It's like a herbal lullaby, growing right beneath your feet. The Aztecs believed certain plants could influence dreams. Some encouraged prophetic visions. Others helped ward off illness or bad winds. Those unseen forces that could twist your rest into restless shapes. One fringe belief that maize silk, the silky threads that grow from the top of corn, could be brewed into tea to quiet the stomach and soothe the soul. Not the kind of fact that makes it into history books, but whispered nonetheless. Down rows of planters and between bites of tamale, you pause beside a low altar built into the garden wall, no bigger than a kneeling stone. Upon it sits a bundle of dried chili peppers, a cocoa pod, and a single obsidian blade. Not for sacrifice, this isn't that kind of garden, but perhaps for symbolic cutting. Severing stress, trimming away unwanted thoughts. You sit nearby, resting your back against a thick agave plant. Its spines cast long, quiet shadows across the soil. A bee hovers lazily around a nearby squash blossom, oblivious to your presence. This wasn't a place to flee from the world. It was a place to fold into it, a place where you didn't need to ask your garden to do more. It was already doing enough growing, breathing, feeding, calming. Even the corn here grows in triads. Milpa, they called it corn, beans, and squash planted together in harmony. The corn rises high, the beans climb its stalk, and the squash sprawls below, keeping the soil moist. They don't compete. They support. If plants can do that, maybe people can too. You take another slow breath. The air is thick with scent, floral, earthy, just a hint of spice. You can taste it without opening your mouth. You lean your head back and close your eyes for just a moment. The garden doesn't need tending. It needs witnessing, and so do you. You shift slightly, stretching your legs beside the agave plant. A small cloud passes over the sun, softening the light and giving everything a momentary hush. That's when you see it, a flicker of movement near the nopal cactus. Not quite shadow, not quite wind. A hummingbird, tiny, vibrant, almost too fast to see. It darts between flowers, pauses midair, and then zips off again. Its wings an invisible blur. It isn't alone. Above the maze, balanced atop a carved wooden post, stands a small figure, arms outstretched, face half worn by time. A guardian statue. Not large, not threatening, but watchful. You approach it quietly, careful not to disturb the hush. It wears a necklace made of clay beads, some dyed with natural pigment teal, ochre, and something that might once have been red. There's a small indentation at its base filled with dried flower petals and a few bird feathers. This is a garden protector, a silent sentinel meant to welcome the right energy and gently discourage the wrong. Historians still debate whether these figures were religious, folkloric, or just an ancient form of garden gnome. But many believe they served both symbolic and practical roles, honoring gods like Xochipilli, patron of flowers, or Huitzilopochtli, god of the hummingbird and sun. You sit beneath a tall sunflower nearby and watch as a hummingbird returns, this time slower, more deliberate. It hovers over a patch of marigolds and then blink. You swear it pauses in midair, watching you. A bit dramatic maybe, but the Aztecs believed hummingbirds carried the spirits of warriors and dreamers alike. Quick, radiant, and stubbornly mysterious. And whether or not that's true, you feel something settle inside you as the bird disappears behind a willow branch. Peace, maybe. Or just a reminder that not all protectors are loud. You stand again and continue down the path. Another statue waits ahead, this one shaped like a toad, carved from dark volcanic stone. Its mouth is slightly open, a drizzle of water dripping from a bamboo spout into a basin below. You kneel beside it, cupping the cool water in your hands, and splash it gently on your face. It smells faintly metallic, faintly floral. Not fresh, not stale, just old in a comforting way. A rustle to your left reveals another guardian, this one hidden among the chilies. A face carved into the bark of a tree, eyes wide and slightly mischievous. Someone has painted its lips bright red, whether it's meant to ward off pests or bad moods. It does both just by being there. You laugh softly. Even here, especially here, there's room for play. Fringe details from old Nahuatl poems suggest that gardeners sometimes left tiny offerings to these guardian spirits: cornmeal, beans, flower petals, drops of pulque, a mildly alcoholic agave drink. Not to demand favors, but to say thank you. To acknowledge the presence of something larger, slower, and infinitely more patient. You spot a boy, maybe 10, maybe 12, tiptoeing between plots, carrying a small basket of petals. He doesn't speak, just kneels and places them carefully around one of the guardian stones, as if he's tucking the statue in for a nap. Then he runs off, laughing softly to himself, disappearing into a plot of amaranth. You're alone again. Except not really, because this garden doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to the sun, the hummingbirds, the toads, the carved watchers in the soil, and now, for just a while, to you too. And as you sit again beneath the willow tree, the quiet guardians blink, not with eyes, but with presence. Not to protect you from harm, but to remind you you're already safe. The light has warmed now, thick and golden, brushing across the garden like a lazy hand smoothing out a blanket. You stand once more and drift toward the canal's edge, where the water sits like a sheet of polished obsidian, still, clear, impossibly calm. A narrow canoe glides into view, steered by a woman standing at the back with a long wooden pole. She's wrapped in a saffron shawl, hair tied back with a strip of indigo cloth. Her movement is slow, smooth, and practice so seamless that the water barely ripples. You crouch at the water's edge, watching as she passes. Her boat is filled not with tools or produce, but with bundles of herbs, shallow clay bowls, and what looks like a small basket of flower heads, yellow, orange, and violet. The air around her seems to shimmer slightly, like the space between dreaming and waking. She nods as she passes. You nod back, and just like that, you're invited. You climb into the next canoe, a low, reed-lined vessel gently bobbing at the bank, and take hold of the long pole resting across its side. It's surprisingly light. You press the end into the soft mud beneath the canal and push. You move, silently, effortlessly. This is how the Aztecs navigated their city of gardens by water, not road. The Chinampas weren't just for farming. They were part of a watery infrastructure, a network of slow lanes and lush green boulevards, suspended between soil and sky. Historians still argue how extensive the canals were, but satellite imaging and excavation suggest hundreds of kilometers of navigable water, connecting gardens, temples, homes, and markets. The result was a city that felt more like a gardened lake than a built space. And because everything moved slowly by paddle, by pole, so did life. You drift past plots of sunflowers taller than your shoulders, past a trellis covered in gourds, past children sitting on the edge of the garden, feet dangling into the canal as they wash freshly picked squash and laugh softly at a joke too far away to hear. A heron takes flight ahead of you, rising lazily into the sky with a soft thump of wings. You pause to admire it, then keep drifting. There's a word for this kind of movement. It's not travel. It's not progress. It's float. And you're floating now. Between gardens, between hours, between thoughts. Somewhere behind you, the woman in the saffron shawl has begun to sing. The sound is barely audible, a melody carried by the breeze. It's not a song you know, but it feels familiar anyway, like something your grandmother might have hummed while slicing fruit. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sun settle on your skin. There's no rush, nowhere to be, and even if there were, you'd never get there faster than this canoe allows. And why would you want to? You open your eyes and dip your fingers into the canal. It's warm now. The fish below scatter lazily, sending small ripples outward. On one garden, a man waves to you from a stone bridge that spans the narrowest part of the waterway. He wears a belt woven with maize husk and a wide straw hat, and he's holding a clay mug, probably pulque. Maybe a tole. He lifts the mug slightly. A morning toast. You return the gesture. Nothing is urgent here, because everything is important. The soil, the silence, the shared nods between strangers, the hum of a reed boat brushing against a canal wall. This was never about getting somewhere. It's about staying here and floating, quietly, in a world where the garden leads the way. Your canoe bumps gently against a wide wooden platform nestled between two Chinampas. You step out, barefoot now, the wood warm beneath your feet from the morning sun. Ahead, rows of thatched stalls are rising like sleepy heads, no shouting, no bustle. Just the slow rhythm of preparation. Welcome to the garden market. It's not the grand marketplace of Tenochtitlan, with its thousands of vendors and fragrant chaos. This is smaller, quieter, a dawn gathering, a place where gardeners trade seeds, herbs, and dreams before the world fully wakes. You walk slowly past baskets brimming with things that smell like history-dried chilies, bundles of lemongrass, tightly coiled squash blossoms, and fat, round avocados resting in reed cradles like eggs in a nest. A young girl sits cross-legged behind one stall, weaving marigolds into a long chain. She doesn't look up, but hums softly as she works, her fingers moving almost faster than your eyes can follow. The flowers swing lazily in the breeze, releasing a scent that's sharp, citrusy, and strangely soothing. And a few stalls down, an old man is trading something curious, bits of obsidian mulch, ground from chipped blades and broken mirrors. This black glassy dust is sprinkled around plant roots not just for ritual protection, but to warm the soil and discourage pests. He holds up a pouch of it proudly and gestures to a calabash gourd full of cornmeal beside him. You nod, not to buy, but because it feels right. Here, everything is offered gently. Even commerce is calm. Historians still argue about the scale of these early morning markets. Were they neighborhood traditions? Informal barters before the big exchanges began? Or something more sacred ceremonies of trade beneath the sun's first light? Some say deals were struck in whispers, so as not to disturb the sleeping gods. Others say it was simply good manners. Either way, you find yourself speaking more quietly now, your breath softened by the hush of so many calm voices. You pause at a booth where a woman with salt and pepper braids grinds cacao on a metate, a flat stone worn smooth with use. The grinding makes a soft scraping sound, rhythmic and oddly musical. She adds a few dried chili flakes and a pinch of maize flour, then scoops the paste into a bowl. She offers you a taste. The mixture is bitter, earthy, and somehow energizing, but without a jolt. Like your brain just stretched and sighed. This is how the day begins in the gardens, not with alarms or deadlines, but with flavor, ritual, and small exchanges wrapped in respect. You sit down on a wide bench near the canal's edge. A boy paddles by slowly, his canoe heavy with bundles of flowers, bright orange cempasúchil and pale white lilies. He grins as he passes and tosses a marigold your way. It lands in your lap. You don't know why, but it feels like a gift. You twirl it in your fingers, noticing how the petals catch the sun like golden thread. A woman beside you leans in and says, softly, that marigolds help guide the spirits, especially the gentle ones. Then she walks away without waiting for a reply. You sit for a while longer, listening to the light chatter of vendors and the occasional bird call echoing from the gardens beyond. No one rushes. Every motion has its time, and even as the market slowly stirs to life, it feels less like a beginning and more like a continuation, another quiet note in the long, soft song of the Chinampas. You take one more look at the flower in your hand, then you tuck it behind your ear and return to the path. The garden path draws you back toward the heart of the Chinampas, where the air feels thicker, denser somehow, not with heat, but with sound. Not loud sound, not city sound. This is a soft, low hum, like bees singing in a forgotten key or wind whispering through woven reeds. You follow the trail past tall maize stalks that sway slightly even without wind, and then you hear it clearly, a voice. Not conversation, song. Low, slow, rich with breath. It rises and falls like the sun over the lake. You round the corner of a garden plot and find the singer, a middle-aged man kneeling beside a patch of squash vines, hands buried deep in the soil. He doesn't notice you at first. His head is bowed. His voice vibrates through his chest more than through his lips. He's singing to his plants, not in a performative way, not for the gods, not for an audience. Just singing. A simple melody, repetitive, earthy, worn in like old sandals. Some say the Aztecs believed that plants listened, that squash grew faster when sung to, that beans twined more gently around the maize if they felt spoken to. Historians still debate whether this was metaphor or actual horticultural advice. Either way, it feels true in this moment. The man lifts his head and smiles at you, just a brief glance, then returns to his work. His fingers gently loosen the soil around a shallow root, pat it back into place. and then press it with a rhythm that matches the beat of his voice. You sit nearby, watching. There's a ritual here, but it's not carved in stone or written in codices. It's buried in gestures: a tap on the root, a hum on the inhale, a pause when the wind picks up. Nearby, a woman is collecting compost in a woven basket, bits of husk, dried petals, broken twigs, all turned into dark, nutrient-rich soil. She spreads it gently over the roots of the chilies, whispering something too soft to catch. This isn't work. This is conversation. And the compost isn't waste, it's memory. Everything here is built on what came before. Old roots, dead leaves, fallen blossoms, even failed harvests. It's one of the quiet secrets of the Chinampas. Nothing is thrown away. Not stories, not seeds, not even the breath it takes to sing. You walk farther into the rows and hear more voices, two children giggling as they plant beans, an elder muttering softly while pruning mint, a group of women seated in a circle weaving herb bundles, their voices blending into one soft current of speech and song. Everywhere, this gentle soundtrack, the soft songs of soil and spirit. And here's the fringe detail. There are old Nahuatl stories that claim certain flowers like the Tlacoxacritl or earth flowers could be coaxed into bloom by sound alone, that the right tone could guide a blossom to open, as if sung awake. You reach down and touch one of these, now broad-petaled, crimson, thick with morning dew. You hum, just to see. It doesn't bloom, but it doesn't seem to mind, because it's not about the result, it's about the presence. You stay there a while, soaking in the layered song of the garden, the distant rhythm of paddles in the canals, the murmur of prayer under breath, the bees harmonizing with a voice that's already fading into the next breath. You don't speak, you just listen, and somewhere beneath the surface of soil, of water, of self, you feel something loosen. A knot you didn't know was there. You don't need to know what it was. The song takes it, the garden keeps it, and you begin, softly, to hum too. The hum of the garden stays with you as you drift toward a smaller, quieter patch tucked between two broad Chinampas. The air here is cooler, shaded by nopal cactus and low trees whose leaves flicker in the breeze like green feathers. You notice something curious: a series of low mounds, carefully spaced, not marked by rows, but by a pattern. You step closer and discover what lives in these little green hollows. Snails, hundreds of them, gliding slowly along moist leaves, curling into shade under smooth river stones, clinging gently to stalks of amaranth and creeping along the borders of furrows. They're not pests here. They're residents, invited guests in this ecosystem of deliberate calm. You squat down to watch. There's something almost hypnotic about the way they move, leaving glossy trails across sun-dappled leaves, their pace entirely immune to urgency. Some gardeners believed the snails could predict rain crawling upward on stalks when the storm gods were near. Others just appreciated their presence as reminders to slow down, to work soft, to notice. Beside the snails, patches of dark green moss sprawl between stepping stones. It's soft under your fingers, cool and damp and fragrant, like the scent of riverbanks and shaded temples. This isn't just decorative. The moss here is used in medicine poultices, tonics, even as bedding in healing huts, and in a pinch it made a decent pillow. Near the moss, you spot a wide-leafed plant covered in soft fuzz tlacoquetzal, used for calming coughs, soothing burns, and some say guiding dreams. The leaves, when crushed, release a scent like fresh-cut cucumber in rain. You lean closer. There's a subtle perfume in this corner of the garden, earthy, leafy, with just a hint of sweetness. The combination of shade, moisture, and silence here gives it a different energy. Less buzzing, more breathing. A narrow path winds through the patch, and as you follow it, you pass under a woven reed arch hung with bundles of dried herbs. They sway gently overhead like wind chimes without sound. Then, ahead a shallow bowl filled with water. Beside it, two polished stones and a bundle of tightly folded leaves. You don't touch them, but you understand what they are: an offering station. Not to a god necessarily, maybe just to the garden itself. A kind of thank you table. A place to pause and recognize the generosity of a patch of earth that gives food, medicine, shade, and quiet without ever asking for anything more than care. Historians still argue whether these micro-gardens full of medicinal plants, mosses, and shade lovers were sacred spaces or simply practical side plots. But there's something undeniably intentional about the way it all fits together. You sit down on a smooth stone, warmed by the sun. A snail inches past your foot. A hummingbird dips into a blossom and flickers away again. And here's something odd you remember reading once: some Aztec healers believed that moss could store memories. That if you lay down your troubles in a garden like this, the moss would take them, hold them, and keep them quiet. So you do, not with words, just with breath. A deep inhale, a slow exhale, a moment of stillness beneath the nopal, and in that quiet space, between snails and moss and soft medicinal shadows, the garden gathers your weight and holds it without question. Not to solve you, but simply to remind you you're part of this too. There's a soft slope leading away from the shaded herb patch, and as you follow it, you come to an open space dappled in mid-morning light. The maze here is shorter, the soil warmer, and the path underfoot is lined not with stones but with cactus, thick patches of nopal. The paddle-shaped cactus stretch out in lazy rows, their surfaces dotted with tiny spines and early fruits. You pause at the edge of the patch, noticing a strange sight: someone napping, flat on their back, one hand resting across the chest, hat tilted over their eyes, breathing slow and steady. Just a person in a cactus field, embracing the stillness. This is not an accident. This is a nopal nap. Aztecs were no strangers to hard work, but they were also wise enough to know that rest had its place, especially in the rhythm of gardening. Here, under the sun, with the scent of earth and cactus fruit thick in the air, a nap wasn't a luxury. It was a ritual. You sit quietly nearby, not to disturb, but to observe. The heat isn't harsh. It's the kind that makes your shoulders loosen, your eyelids droop. The kind of heat that speaks of fertility, not fatigue. You let your hand rest on the warm ground. It pulses gently with life. Nearby, a small boy tiptoes between the cacti with a woven basket. He's collecting tunas, the fruit of the nopal. Some are crimson, others pale green, all speckled with soft spines. He works quickly, but not carelessly, humming under his breath. You glance at the sleeping gardener, still motionless, still breathing deeply, like someone who's let the garden hold them. Fringe stories from oral traditions say that some healers recommended napping near cactus for energy balancing. That the electromagnetic properties of the plant, however misunderstood, created a calming effect. Whether true or not, you start to feel it too. You lie back slowly, placing your head on a folded shawl. The soil beneath you smells of sage and something sweet. A breeze carries the scent of nopal flowers, subtle but clean, the kind of smell you remember long after it's gone. Above you, bees hover lazily. One lands on a blossom near your foot, dips in and lifts off again, dusted with pollen like someone returning from a dream. Somewhere beyond the cactus patch, a flute begins to play, soft, distant. A few low notes, then silence. Then a repeat. Not music for performance, but presence. A song for the air, not the ears. And now you understand why someone would choose this patch to sleep. Not a bedroom, not a bed. Just soft earth, sharp plants, warm sun, and the slow song of a world that does not hurry. You close your eyes, not to sleep, necessarily, just to feel more deeply, to be held by the heat, to be stilled by the sound, to become one more silent bloom in a garden full of breath and green. And if, maybe, you dream of bees or cactus flowers or clouds shaped like maize, the nopal won't tell. When you stir again, it's dusk, not the bold flame of sunset, but the cool quiet before it. Shadows stretch longer between the rows, and the air has shifted from dry warmth to something softer, edged with the scent of wood smoke and soil. You're still in the cactus patch, but the energy has changed. You sit up slowly and hear it, the crackle of fire, somewhere beyond the nopal. The glow of a flame flickers behind tall amaranth stalks. You rise, brush off your palms, and follow the light. It leads you to a narrow clearing, where a group of gardeners are gathered in a circle around a low fire pit, nestled in a stone ring. A few of them are kneeling, gently dropping seeds into shallow furrows. Others tend to ceramic lamps, lighting them one by one and placing them along the garden rows like glowing breadcrumbs. This is night gardening. Not frantic, not industrial. Just firelight, soil, and ritual. In the soft golden light, faces glow with a kind of reverence. No one speaks above a whisper. Even the children carrying baskets of dried beans and maize kernels move like dreamers in a shared trance. You take a seat near the edge of the gathering, cross-legged, careful not to disturb the circle. A young woman beside you holds a pouch of seeds teosinte, the ancient ancestor of corn. She offers you a few. You cup your hands, and they tumble in like tiny fossils. Hard, speckled, holding centuries in silence. You press one into the soil, just one, and even though it's barely deeper than your thumbnail, you cover it gently, as if tucking in a child. There are stories you remember about seeds sown after sundown, the belief that darkness made them humble, more receptive, more likely to grow strong, that the night whispered secrets into their shells that daylight could never teach. Historians still argue about how much of this was science, how much was ceremony. But here, beneath a sky bleeding into indigo, it doesn't matter. You feel it in your fingertips, the slight resistance of the earth, the warmth of the soil still holding the sun's memory. A man nearby smears his palms with a thin layer of ash and presses them onto flat stones beside the rows. His prints remain faint, gray, impermanent. Another offers a splash of pulque, a fermented agave drink, into the earth. A toast, a gift, a thank you for harvests not yet begun. Then the singing begins, low, layered, nothing formal. Just voices blending in a tone older than language. Women, men, children, all folded into the same sound. It moves with the firelight, pulsing like breath, rising with the stars now visible above. The garden flickers around you, lit by oil lamps, scattered flames, and starlight. Each plant seems to glow, not from light, but from the fact that it's being seen, heard, sung to. Someone hands you a gourd of warm corn drink. You sip. It's thick, slightly sweet, and tastes like rest. There's a fringe story that maize once fell from the stars. That a god, tired of watching humans eat roots and bugs, cracked open the sky and dropped kernels into a lake. The Chinampas, then, were how humans gave thanks islands of order to hold starlight seeds. You look up, the sky is full, and so is the garden. Not with noise, not with motion, but with presence, and as the fire dims, as the seeds settle, as the hush returns, you feel it too. You weren't just in the garden, you've become it. The firelight lingers behind you as you walk back through the Chinampa paths, but your feet move slower now, like the earth itself has begun to drowse. Everything feels hushed, settled. Even the birds have quieted, leaving just the croak of a distant frog and the soft rustle of reeds in the night breeze. But ahead, a sound like drums made of rain. You round a bend in the garden and find them a circle of dancers moving barefoot on the packed earth, their feet pattering in time with the beat of a hollow log drum. Around them, baskets of petals and mace, little piles of beans and cacao pods, and a ring of flowers laid in intricate loops like crop mandalas. This isn't a harvest celebration, it's a rain ceremony. Not to plead, not to demand, just to invite. The Aztecs didn't view rain as something you could command. It was a guest, and like all guests, it deserved beauty, music, and a proper welcome. These ceremonies were held in gardens, not temples. And they weren't loud, they were rhythmic, soothing, made for the ears of gods and seedlings alike. You stand quietly at the edge, watching the dancers' bare feet kick up tiny clouds of dust, watching the flower petals scatter and swirl. One woman moves with a clay pot balanced on her head, half filled with lake water. It sloshes gently but never spills. Somewhere near the drum, an elder kneels beside a bowl of Tlamatini vanilla orchid pods, sacred and rare. He crushes a few in his palm, releasing a heady, deep scent into the air. It mixes with the smoke of copal resin, winding upward in thin, ghostly threads. The scent pulls you into something deeper, dreamlike. You sit beside the dancers and close your eyes. Their steps vibrate through the earth into your bones. The drumbeat taps something ancient behind your ribs. And in that moment, the sky answers not with rain, but with a sudden coolness, like a breeze pulling down from the clouds to taste the ceremony. Historians still debate the true role of these garden rituals. Were they serious? Were they symbolic? Were they spiritual exercises disguised as farming chores? But you don't need to argue. You just need to breathe. Because even the flowers are swaying now. And as the dancers shift from rhythmic steps to stillness, each one places a blossom into the soil, whispering something you can't hear. The drumming fades, the petals settle, and for a long while, no one moves at all. You lie back in the soft grass beside the dancing ring. The stars overhead are brighter now, sharp, glittering. A few clouds drift slowly across them, hinting at what may come. The garden is not dry, it is waiting, and perhaps the rain will come, not because we called it, but because we danced quietly enough to be heard. The dancers have gone, their footsteps fading into the reeds and dusk. But the garden remains unchanged, and yet not the same. You walk alone now, tracing the outer edge of the Chinampa, where the plants grow a little wilder. The maize is taller here, leaning in from the breeze, whispering to each other in rustling tongues. The canal beside you glows silver with starlight, quiet as a dream you're only halfway in. This path isn't trodden often. It skirts the oldest part of the garden where trees are thicker, vines tangled, and the remnants of something ancient slumber beneath the loam. You pass a stone set crooked into the ground, half covered in moss. There are symbols carved into it, faint, but still readable. A serpent curling around a maize stalk, a drop of water balanced on a blossom. This was once a marker, a boundary between garden and wild, between order and the memory of conquest, because the gardens were not untouched. And tonight, in this quiet edge where the soil softens and the reeds grow tall, you feel the before and after pressing against each other. You pause beneath a wide tree with low branches. Its bark is scarred, scratched by tools or time. You can't be sure. But something tells you this tree witnessed more than most. Here's what they don't teach you in school when the Spanish arrived. They marveled at the Chinampas not because they were spiritual, but because they were efficient. Floating gardens, perfect for feeding cities, scalable, replicable. They wanted to own them. And so the quiet rhythms of the Chinampa, the singing, the hummingbirds, the soft-footed dances were slowly pressed under the boot of empire. Not destroyed all at once, but rewritten, formalized, flattened, until the gardens were less about spirit and more about yield. You kneel near the tree and place your hand on its roots. It's still warm, Still humming, because even conquest couldn't unroot the calm. These gardens did not protest in noise. They resisted by remaining, by continuing to grow, to compost, to feed, by teaching new hands how to plant, how to listen, how to be still again. In some villages, stories persisted. Stories of seeds buried during invasions and dug up by granddaughters generations later. Of guardian statues hidden beneath canal beds, waiting. Of sacred songs hummed under breath during forced prayers to foreign gods. Historians argue about how much was truly lost, but the soil remembers, and so do the roots. You sit back, eyes drifting to the sky again. The stars are softer now, wrapped in a thin blanket of cloud. Somewhere nearby, water laps against the edge of a canoe. Maybe it's a wind current. Maybe it's someone returning home. Maybe it's the garden breathing again. You rise and brush the earth from your knees. The tree watches, unmoving. A breeze lifts a few petals from the ground and carries them out over the canal. You watch them go, not as loss, but as reminder that silence is not surrender. It is a form of strength, and gardens, even ones conquered, continue. They endure in petals and compost, in old trees and whispered songs, and in you. Now, you follow the garden path back toward where the Chinampas open to the lake. Your steps slower, heavier now, but not with tiredness, with a kind of completion. The way your limbs feel after a warm bath, the way a soft voice lingers in your chest long after the sound has faded. The moon has risen fully now, not bold, not sharp, just round and golden, like a bowl of calm tipped gently over the night. You stand at the edge of the last garden and look back. There it is, everything. The maize standing tall like sentinels, the nopal glinting silver in the moonlight, the canals like quiet veins threading through green. No one speaks, because the garden is speaking now, in stillness, in scent, in memory. You kneel one last time and touch the soil. It feels the same, but also different. Cooler now, damp with the breath of night. There's something sacred about this gesture. Not goodbye, not possession, just acknowledgement. Your fingers curl slightly, and you press your palm flat. Beneath you, the earth does not shift. It holds. And now, the wind down begins. The stars soften as if someone's drawn a curtain of mist across the sky. Your body begins to loosen, every breath deepening, slow and full. The reeds beside you sway gently, brushing each other with the sound of paper. The hush grows richer. The moon reflects off the water like a second world you could fall into if you let go. The scent of damp earth, crushed herbs, and a hint of vanilla still lingers on your fingertips. Somewhere across the lake, a bird calls once, then quiets. A soft hum echoes in your mind, not from memory, but from the garden itself. That rhythm of breath and stillness, of soil and song, folding you inward like a seed preparing to dream. You lie back one last time on the warm ground, eyes half closed. The Chinampa floats. You float too, held by roots that stretch not downward, but backward through centuries of hands that never rushed, voices that never shouted, and feet that danced without sound. The water laps gently. The wind quiets. Your thoughts begin to fade, like the firelight from earlier down to embers, then to glow, then to rest. And the last thing you feel, before sleep takes your hand and leads you in, is the garden breathing with you.